Good afternoon. I'd like to begin with an introduction. Sorry, can I have the video projector on? So I'd like to begin with an introduction to the FEL, or the free electron laser, and then progress into the multitude of advancements that it and its subsequent siblings are responsible for in areas of science, spectroscopy, and current thought. From there, we'll move further into the potential and some propositions that these and other lasers are right in the midst of. So, a free electron laser, or an FEL, is a natural alternative as a radiation source. In 1971, J.M. Maddy invented and developed the FEL as a relativistic electron tube that made use of an advanced open optical resonator. An important step in FEL development came in 1976 when Maddy and his co-workers at Stanford University measured gain from an FEL configured as an amplifier at 10 UM wavelength. This experiment and the successful operation of the same FEL, configured as an oscillator in 1977 at 3 UM wavelength, created a large interest in FEL research, which, for many reasons, as I'm about to illustrate, to this day still continues to grow. The two most important attributes of the FEL, tunability and design flexibility, were demonstrated by these two early experiments at significantly different wavelengths. So figure 7 here is a schematic of an FEL where the periodic undulator field is indicated by the rotating arrows. The typical peak magnetic field in the undulator is a few kilogauss with a wavelength where A equals several centimeters and N equals 100 periods. The length of the undulator is several meters inside the optical resonator mirrors, which are separated by about twice the undulator length, or about 10 meters. The electron beam path is indicated horizontally, and the beam energy can vary from a few MeV to several GeV, although the typical FEL uses an electron beam energy of around 50 MeV. The transverse dimensions in the FEL schematic here are exaggerated with respect to the longitudinal distance shown, as the electron beam pulse is typically about 1 millimeter, and the optical mode waste is about 3 millimeters. The electron beam pulse can be as several microseconds in a recirculating electrostatic accelerator, but in a radio frequency, or RF accelerator, with the storage ring, the electron beam structure is determined by the RF frequency. Yet in an RF accelerator, only those electrons with the correct phase relation in the RF cycle continue to be accelerated, with the resulting accelerated electron current being produced in a few short microseconds, referred to as picoseconds. So the minimum separation between micropulses here is 1 RF cycle, but often there is much larger separation of many nanoseconds. The stream of micropulses continues for about 10 US, up to about 1 millisecond, because the RF power source here is pulsed. This stream of micropulses is called a macropulse, and in a storage ring using lower frequency RF, the micropulse length is typically a nanosecond, separated by several RF cycles. That said, there is no macropulse in a storage ring, as the radiation pulse structure in a FEL reflects that of an electron beam, as we can see here in figure 9. So the electrons entering the operating FEL are forced to move from side to side due to the undulator's magnetic field, but now they radiate in the presence of the stored transverse radiation field. As the radiation passes over the more slowly moving electrons, the radiation electric field does work on the oscillating electrons. This is the classic version of what we all know as analog quantum stimulated emission, or AQSE. So here, a significantly different energy exchange can occur only when the undulator and radiation field forces on the relativistic electrons are nearly resonant. The electrons in the beam are initially spread randomly over many radiation wavelengths, with many millions of electrons within each section of the beam at only one wavelength long. The orientation of the radiation's electric field vector and the electron's undulator velocity vector rotates through 2 kilohertz within each radiation wavelength. These different orientations determine that about half the electrons lose energy to the radiation field, while other electrons gain energy from the co-moving wave. It's a very simple concept in that the electrons that gain energy begin to move ahead of the average electron, while the electrons that lose energy begin to fall behind the average. So as the faster electrons move ahead of the average and the slower electrons move back, the beam is periodically bunched on the radiation wavelength scale, and then since the electron energy loss and gain repeats throughout the electron beam over many radiation wavelengths, the beam becomes bunched on a scale of the radiation wavelength. So the emission rate for a perfectly bunched beam of electrons is proportional to the square of the number of electrons, whereas the emission rate for a beam of randomly positioned electrons is only proportional to the number of electrons themselves. This is interesting to a lot of us, as it's the same kind of electron bunching that was the goal of the original microwave oven tubes. So if the FEL works in a similar way, but the key here is that it can reach infrared, optical, UV, and even X-ray wavelengths. The bunch beam then radiates coherently and amplifies the existing radiation, as seen here in Figure 7. So, for a common application of this, the modulated laser beam is collimated and then directed through a 10 centimeter long gas cell equipped with wedge CaF2 windows. The transmitted light is focused onto an HGCD photoconductive detector cooled to 77K. This detector is coupled to a match preamplifier whose output is detected by a lock-in amplifier, and the wavelength modulation dither serves as the lock-in reference. The lock-in output being recorded often with a 14-bit digital signal processor equipped with microcomputer. Now, this computer records individual ramp scans and can be set to average these scans. So as you see here, the data reported was recorded mostly by use of a 16 scan, averaging with a lock-in bandwidth of 250 Hertz, resulting in a net detection bandwidth of 16 Hertz. But because the dither frequency is much lower than the underlying pulse repetition, this arrangement results in VM absorption spectroscopy with variable pulse integer operation capabilities, and thus adds an element of precision not seen since Matty wowed the initial crowds on floors in the 1970s. The classical gain in the low-gain new FEL oscillator develops from coherent electron bunching on the scale of the radiation wavelength. So as the electron travels through the undulator, they accelerate from side to side and also spontaneously radiate in the forward direction. The spontaneous emission process is the same as used to generate UV and X-rays in undulators and wigglers of synchrotron radiation sources. And on the first few passes through the FEL oscillator, some of this spontaneous radiation is stored in the resonator as the radiation power grows over many passes. The emission process begins to differ from that of the synchrotron sources, and again, it becomes similar to the mechanisms used in the early microwave electron tubes, only these are far smarter, seemingly with a mind of their own. In an FEL amplifier, as opposed to an oscillator, the high current of the electron beam increases the rate of the electron bunching process along the undulator. For a sufficiently high beam current entering a sufficiently long undulator, the same electron bunching process that occurs over many passes in the new FEL oscillator can be completed in a single pass along the FEL amplifier. This amplified wavelength can be selected by an external oscillator laser, and in the super radiant, or even next level, as we refer to them, FELs, there is no external oscillator, so that radiation must first grow from spontaneous emission. As the optical power grows, the spectrum narrows to establish coherence, And this process is what we refer to as self-amplified spontaneous emission, or SASE. So basically, the relativistic electron tubes see each other, rapidly advancing undulator period Lorentz contracted to a shorter wavelength, quantum QC Cascade laser 1, semiconductor laser, demonstrating temperatures in the mid-infrared wavelength range of 3 to 19. But at chirogenic temperatures, good agreement computed and measured threshold current densities, slope-efficient devices in contrast at 300 K, predicted value, threshold current density between 1 and 3 centimeters squared, depending on whether theoretical or experimental values of the waveguide losses are used, and are much lower than that of the experimental values reported in the literature, between 4.7 and 7 Ka. So achieving threshold current values, theoretical predictions crucial to improving the room temperature performance of QC lasers, devices continuous wave operation on a Peltier cooler. But QC laser electrons, injected upper midi-band lattice design, super QC laser design, are recombined radiatively lower state or lower midi-band gain, where G is proportional to the population inversion, or 4/4 drums from subs, between the upper where n equals 3 and the lower where n equals 2 states. So let us assume schematically then that a fraction of the current is injected into the upper state and that 2 into the lower state. So in this case, G can be written as n equals L by 3.79, and that R, or the most current and advanced FEL, could possibly reach new depths of emotive reaction, similar only to that of a transcendence induction, by way of direct brain transference, which is a magnitude of microscopic possibility, possibly as such.
The way you dance was cool. They said that I still outshines. It's just this way.
So, for a couple of decades now, laser photoacoustic spectroscopy, or LPAS to most of you, has emerged as a valid alternative to all optical and neurospectroscopic techniques. And sub-PPP detection limits are now obtained in commercial systems for trace gas applications between 11 and 14. In LPAS, the intensity of the wavelength, or the laser source, is pulsed and modulated at a frequency VM lying in the acoustic range rather than the visual. So a heat transference occurs from the optically or neurally excited molecules to the surrounding ones, producing a pressure wave frequency VM, which is then detected by means of an acoustic transducer. The use of a simple commercial mirror ball as a detection element constitutes a great advantage of LPAS with respect to the transmission of these neurospectroscopic techniques. This is partially relevant when MRI or function 1 sources are used. In fact, in this case, nitrogen-cooled HGCD infrared detectors provide the only viable solution for reaching these required sensitivities, in spite of being expensive and thus arguably impractical. This is the reason why, although limits of detection in the part per million ppm and sub-ppm range were admittedly demonstrated with the quantum Cascade lasers, but in standard transmission configurations, nevertheless, it is not clear whether these solutions will ever compete against systems exploiting near IR direct lasers or MADI's initial FEL complications. So what is being proposed here is a design that attempts to take advantage of the resonant tunneling injection feature of the 3QW design and the electron extraction efficiency of the superlattice design. In this design, shown schematically here in figure 27, the active region spans the whole period and consists of a chirped superlattice presenting a tilted lower midi band, whose width is maximum in the center and decreases on both sides close to the adjacent barriers. The upper state is created in the first mini gap by a small well adjacent to the injection barrier, and its wave function has a maximum close to the injection barrier wall and decreases smoothly in the active region. But in short, it will reach the brain faster and with much greater precision than even MADI's later FELs. So making use of this cooling technique, the high-energy laser that uses a liquid has the same angle of refraction as the mirrors inside the blaster. That way, the ray gun, as we refer to it, can fire away even while it's being cooled. And this particular experiment is currently in the third of 5 phases of development, with a 15 kilowatt subscale prototype being tested. In the next phase, the demonstrator device will be scaled up to 150 kilowatts and will specifically be targeting to achieve the lower specific weight and compact size needed to be mounted in a smaller airborne vehicle. The final phase is engineering, fabricating, integrating, and demonstrating the complete weapon system on a tactical, both oral and visual platform. This final technique is based on ultra-short bursts of laser light that freeze the movement of neural electrons, just like a strobe light effect, but the scale at which the team are working now is being measured in attoseconds, so 1 billion billionth of a second, with state-of-the-art laser flashes being 100 attoseconds. So towards this end, the following critical points will be addressed in the very near future. Reduction of spectroscopic waste when inducing short-term catharsis, reduction of the acoustic transducer possible harm and permanence of such state, and a major increase in the capacity of widespread induction of catharsis, profundity, transcendence via spectrosurgery, and abstract visual imagery. Furthermore, the possibility of completely eliminating the optics while still maintaining their full effect is an option that we're exploring experimentally. With respect to photoacoustic detection schemes based on the excitation of longitudinal modes, which need a focus beam, this would represent a considerable advantage in terms of simplicity and ease of fabrication. Actually, the use of advanced FEL devices and the introduction of them in the commercial market would greatly improve the selectivity of the sensor for applications where spectral interference is a major con and where group mentality is paramount. So, in conclusion, the final phase of FEL neurospectroscopic comprehension that proposes a system that could almost invisibly slice the sonic distance from Earth to Jupiter into hair widths, large-scale cohesion of transcendence-inducing modules built to aid in harnessing the extreme potential of the FEL. And with a little faith, we'll soon be on the cusp of this glorious day for science. If anyone has any questions, I'm glad to answer them now. Well, thank you very much.